Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is James Bennet. I'm the editor of The Atlantic. I have the privilege today of interviewing Eric Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt, why don't you come up here? If these good people need more information about your background, I think they know how to get it. He is the chairman and CEO of Google.
Thanks, James. Hi.
We've heard a fair amount at this conference over the last couple of days about what Washington doesn't get about what's going on in the country and going on in the world. Among your roles, you sit on the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, so you're in Washington now, I think, every couple months from Silicon Valley. What do you think Washington doesn't understand?
I would invert the question by saying the average American doesn't realize how much the laws are written by lobbyists. And that is, and I'm not trying to offend anyone who might be of that like here, and it's shocking now, having spent a fair amount of time inside the system, how the system actually works. And it's obvious that if the system is organized around incumbencies writing the laws, the incumbencies will benefit from the laws that are written.
And what is the effect that has on the economy?
Well, it perpetuates the current incumbents, whoever they are. And they are the classic power structures here in Washington. And it's shocking to me how hard it is to take on any incumbency in Washington or probably at the state level as well.
But Google is now one of the greatest incumbent corporations in America.
Well, perhaps, but we don't write the laws.
But you do have your own lobbying operation.
Yes. One of thousands.
Well, how would you restructure the system so that it didn't? I mean, if Washington is, in one way, not just politically but in commercial terms, is essentially an incumbent protection machine, what would you do to change that?
Well, one of the things about technology is that technology is fundamentally disruptive. And my experience now, I've done this for a long time, is people are always shocked at how real disruption occurs and how much change can occur through empowerment, new technologies, and both good and bad, hopefully mostly good. And we're at a point now in technology where we really can change the entire political discourse if we want to. A typical example would be that everybody here has a mobile phone, right? In fact, you probably have more than one. The fact of the matter is that in Washington, and again, I've been part of this for years, people write lots of reports about things, but they never actually test them. But with the mobile phone, you could actually just ask everyone. You could measure everything. And you might be surprised as to what people actually do versus what they say they do, sort of one of the first rules of the Internet. And so it seems to me that you could completely change the way that government works and the way the discussion works. Another example would be that there are large numbers of very, very well-meaning groups that do analysis, that produce lots of reports that people don't actually read. But we can measure whether they're read. And you could use that as a scoring algorithm for whether you should listen to them or not. You could ultimately decide that people don't read anything important, or you could try to figure out what is important that they're actually reading. I'm not trying to pass judgment. I'm just trying to say you could organize the system very differently about what is actually happening. Another example, I was part of the proposing and in fact lobbied there for the ARRA, the Recovery Act, which I think was very important at the time. It could have easily been written in a different way. It could have been written as we're going to give a whole bunch of money, and then every month we're going to iterate based on the best impact that it's had against these metrics. That's the way business people think. That's not how the law was written, because the law was written for the incumbencies that helped write the law, 2,000 pages long. So again, if you think about the way if the government's job is primarily, aside from defense, is allocating taxes and basically spreading money around and for good deeds, why don't we go to a more iterative and measured approach, where we take a look at what's really happening as opposed to what everybody thinks is happening?
You've talked a bit about what you've seen as weaknesses in really the American economic system relative to the Chinese system, at least the way we practice our business, not just the relationship between government and business, but the way we're organized. You've said recently we have a problem taking the ideas in world-class research and turning it into a business. Do you think there's some sign that the American model is actually slipping behind the Chinese model?
two separate data points, each of which I think is very important. The first is that America's research universities are the envy of the world. We have 18 or 19 out of the top 20 research universities in the United States. There are many reasons for this. Let's give some credit for government expenditures. The enormous explosion in spending in the last 50 years in the defense industry, post-World War II, helped create the modern research university, all of those research funding, so forth. The internet was created essentially out of Defense Department funding. So all of the money, all of the investments pay off now, where we have literally 90 or 95% of the top researchers in the world in the United States. There are errors in our strategy. For example, we have this bizarre policy where we will train people in these universities and then we kick them out because we won't give them visas, which makes no sense at all. But those are small details compared to the enormous achievement of American top-flight universities. Now let's talk about China. China, I think, can best be understood as a well-run large business. And China has roughly the following objectives. It wants to maximize its cash flow. It's becoming the creditor, if you will, the bank of the world. And the second, it wants to maximize its both internal demand as well as export demand. And the entire country seems to be organized around that principle. So if you look at all of the interesting new businesses that China, again, thinking of them as a business, and I appreciate that's not what they really are, so I'm just using this to make the point, can be understood as a focus of business expansion. So China decided that renewable energy was important. They now control 80% of the solar panels. Realistically, we had that choice 5 or 10 years ago as a country. Realistically, that would never have gotten through our political and social climate. Nobody in America would get away with saying, what we should do is we should organize a fundamental industrial policy to go and dominate this section of this part of an important new industry. And yet that's exactly what China did, and now those jobs are in China, not here. By the way, all that technology was invented in America. Similar stories occur in South Korea and in Singapore. So my point here is that there is a different industrial model which is creating high-tech, high-end advanced manufacturing jobs, and we are losing those jobs. One more thing to give you some more data. We've been looking at this question of manufacturing because I strongly believe that America needs a manufacturing base, in particular an advanced manufacturing base, to create high-quality jobs, drive innovation, all the things that we all care about. The vast majority of global companies have their manufacturing now outside of the United States because they can invent the technology in America and then they can get the same quality manufacturing for stuff that's invented in American universities in other countries as well. So it's a very, very tough competitive environment.
But is that purely a policy-making problem? I mean, connect those two ideas for me. I mean, the Chinese are not exactly embracing disruption. That's not the key to the success. It's scale and actually, in some ways, the opposite. It's a long-term, consistent industrial policy. Is the problem here too much change and unpredictability in the business environment? You can't tell what the tax system is going to be year to year. What is it from a policy-making perspective that needs to change to achieve the kind of industrial policy you're describing?
Well, first place,
competitiveness, rather. It's not
the American business community disagrees on a lot of the answers to these questions. One thing everybody will agree on is that they would prefer consistency rather than constant change. One of the sort of jokes is that the best, it sounds very obnoxious, sorry, that one of the best things to do is to sort of have the government be distracted by other things while business gets its thing done. Because business takes a longer term view than much of the political process. And there's some evidence that in the current recession, the lack of long-term capital investment, basically companies are hoarding cash for all sorts of reasons, is related to business uncertainty. That's one of the criticisms of the Obama administration, and probably to some degree true. It's probably true in all administrations as well. The Chinese model can be understood as classic industrial policy around creating new industries. Now, that is disruptive, but it's very top-down. Again, very unfamiliar to the American model. The American model is much more entrepreneurial, has created, again, great industries. And it's not necessarily that one will dominate the other, but we have to embrace the one that we're good at, which is the entrepreneurship one.
Speaking of the president, you've been a supporter of Barack Obama, and you serve on his council. Mayor Bloomberg was here yesterday and he took a little bit of a shot at Barack Obama over his relationship with business. He said, Obama is a liberal guy, pro-union, not particularly interested in business. How do you respond to that?
Well, my experience with the president has been that he's very interested in these things. The criticisms that the business community have a lot to do with tone. If you actually look at the criticisms, the Obama administration did, in fact, extraordinarily quickly move to essentially not nationalize, but fundamentally take over and control and regulate the financial system in such a way that provided the capital that business needed to continue operation. And there's no question, I think, in most people's minds that it would have been much worse. So my reading of the criticism, speaking as a supporter, is it's mostly about tonality and so forth. The fact that people are now saying, well, they need more business executives in the cabinet. Would it be better just to have the best people in the cabinet and not worry about where they came from? Again, that's the way I think about it. It's about symbolism and focus, I suspect.
I'd actually like to ask you one specific intervention that this administration made into the economy to assist the automakers. Do you see that as a kind of classic instance of the government protecting an incumbent rather than allowing a major sector to be disrupted as it was naturally being disrupted by competitors? Or do you think that was a justified move?
Well, if you review the arguments, a classic capitalist, which tends to be my personal view, is that you would have intervened in none of these things. And that, in fact, you would have allowed the system to work it out, and that through properly functioning bankruptcy laws, the firms would have been able to continue to operate, that there would have been enough capital and so forth and so on. There were a set of reasons why that didn't occur. One is that there was a feeling that the bankruptcy structures, which again have since been changed in the law, would not fundamentally have survived. The firms, there would have been too much damage. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so the intervention in the financial markets, AIG, for example, which is essentially an insurance agency where the government owned 80%, General Motors where it owned a majority. I think the judge should be now whether the government makes money. And then we should have a long debate in the future as to whether we ever want to have that as an incentive. My own objective, my personal view, would be that we try to avoid this at pretty much all costs, and that we go into these too big to fail kinds of industries, and we figure out a way to make them not be too big to fail. Because you can't have capitalism without failure. So don't confuse yourself. If you think it's a private company and yet it's too big to fail, why is it not a regulated government entity? It makes no sense. You have inconsistent incentives. And in any government, incentives drive everything, as well as in the business world. And I think you can understand, having now spent some time here, you can understand that the product of Washington is largely driven by the incentives. The politicians behave based on the incentives that they have to get reelected, the way television works, the way politicking works. We all know the details here. It's true in business as well.
Let me ask you a little bit about your own business. We had on the Atlantic.com's tech channel a really interesting interview yesterday with your chief economist, Hal Varian. And he said, now you Google things on your computer, of course, and you Google things on your phone. That's the next stage. And I believe people may laugh, but I think there will be an implant, which he said would be created by Google or somebody else within 10 years.
And did you ask him at the time, are you the first volunteer?
He did not. He seemed eager, as did the interviewer, I have to say, to actually acquire one of these.
Okay, they're ahead of me.
Continuously, he did say he wasn't sure if anybody inside the company was actually working on this yet. Maybe you could tell us.
At Google, one is never sure. It's a completely bottoms-up company.
Is this a realistic prospect in 10 years? And do you understand why it kind of creeps people out a little bit?
There's what I call the creepy line, and the Google policy about a lot of these things is to get right up to the creepy line but not cross it. I would argue that implanting things in your brain is beyond the creepy line.
Mine in particular.
Yes. At least for the moment, until the technology gets better. Let's talk a little bit about information and search and how people consume it. I think Google's certainly been successful in traditional text search. You type in a query, you get the answer, off you go. That is the majority of our business usage, brand, and so forth and so on. And we invest, gazillions of dollars into making that happen. We just introduced a product called Google Instant, where it literally does the searches as you type. And the calculation of the savings of a couple of seconds there translates into enormous human productivity when you compound it over the number of couple billion of searches that we get every day. So we're very proud of that. The next thing, of course, is the same kinds of things in a mobile device. Again, going back to the principle that everyone here has a mobile device. You have phones, soon you'll have tablets and so forth. You carry these things around. And if you think about those devices, the phones and the tablets and so forth, they know a lot more about you. They know, for example, where you are. So that context could inform a better question. If you said, I want a hot dog, it could say, well, you're in Washington, D.C., near the museum, and off it can go. A lot of language is about disambiguation, and the more information we have about you, again, with your permission, I need to say that right up front. So you have to choose to do this. Otherwise, you could just do anonymous searches. They're just not going to be as accurate. But with your permission, you give us more information. If you give us information about who some of your friends are, we can probably use some of that information, again, with your permission, to improve the quality of your searches. Okay. So the next thing that we can do is we can take pictures and do the same thing. So here you have your camera. Take a picture of the Capitol right there. We can tell you that it's the Capitol. We can also infer that you're near the Capitol. So again, all of that is about improving accuracy. So one of the things that eventually happens in that line of reasoning is we don't need you to type at all, because we know where you are with your permission. We know where you've been with your permission. We can more or less guess what you're thinking about. Now, is that over the line? Is that right over the line?
We should take a vote.
Is that right over the line?
It's getting
okay,
close,
well, so maybe our guesses won't be very good. Maybe we'll limit those. You see what I'm saying? So we'll try to find that line to try to help you understand more about the world around you. But the fact of the matter is, because of the development of phones and the world's knowledge base, this enormous explosion of user-generated and other information, we can provide a lot of services that can help you get through the day.
And I've heard you call this augmented humanity, and describe what's happening as kind of letting computers do what...
I should say, by the way, as far as I know, we do not have a medical lab working on implants.
It's just for the record.
Just for the record, as far as I know.
Okay. Could you check and see if you actually do?
I will check after this.
They are working on projecting it onto glasses, though.
Yeah, there actually are. There's quite a bit of research funded in America's universities, by the way, of various forms of near projection, near field projection. So project onto your glasses, project onto goggles, that kind of thing. Think of them as heads-up display kind of approaches. And I'm not sure you really want to walk through town with these odd glasses on, with looking like an Air Force, jet fighter or something. But I'm sure people will. I mean, as I was driving by here, I saw people riding their Segways, looking like normal pedestrians.
Augmented humanity you've described as letting computers do what they do well, letting human beings focus on what they do well. What is it you think human beings do well?
Hard question. One way to think about, I think, computers and people is that the computers are really good at some things that we're no good at all. They remember billions of things incredibly accurately, and none of us, even the most brilliant of all of us, do that. And furthermore, they can search across that in literally milliseconds and come up with all sorts of interesting results that even we with all of our wonderful reasoning and intuition can't do. Now, humans, on the other hand, have judgment, have intuition, and have the ability to recognize patterns in ways that computers are unlikely to for a reasonably long time. In fact, many of the algorithms that we use are, in fact, computer trained. What you do is the computer starts off, you sort of program it in general, and you say, oh, yes, that looks right, oh, that looks wrong. Many of the language algorithms, we do automatic translation, start off with those kinds of approaches. So humans can help computers get better, and humans can help computers get better. And ultimately, if you take this forward for some decades, it's obvious that the computers will be our assistants, right? That they will wander around with us, if you will. They know where we are, and they'll care what we're doing. They'll be able to track all these kinds of things. And this means that, for example, you don't need to remember as much as you used to. I was growing up here in Virginia, and at the time, in 7th grade, they ordered me, the teacher told me, I had to memorize all 50 county capitals in the state of Virginia, which I dutifully did. And, why? Right? It bothers me to this day. At the age of 12, I had to do this. You don't have to do this anymore. You're never lonely, and you're never bored now.
But Yes, I actually wish I was sometimes.
Well, by the way, the off button is still working.
Yes. Oh.
There is an off button, and
Keep
you
that
can
in
turn
mind.
it off.
But you just described a moment ago, you said intuition and judgment are left to humans, but a moment ago you described a system in which the computer will be intuiting what I think as I'm walking down the street.
No.
I'm stretching words here, but
that would be on the other side. That would be on the other side of the creepy line.
Intuiting, it's guessing what I'm interested in,
yes.
And it's making judgments about what I'm going to be interested in, what I'm going to want to do next, what I'm going to want to stop at the street and look at. So that's beginning to intrude on what you described as the kind of human sphere of really unique attributes. And I mean, there are really two strains of thinking running through American history about technology. There's the utopian strain, the looking backward, Bellamy strain, and the more dystopian strain about scary, what computers can do. Does it keep you up nights? Do you worry about that second category? And what's going to keep us from that dystopian vision of the future?
I worry a lot about the latter, simply because there is a history of technology being misused by evil people for their own purposes. And if you follow the line of reasoning about we know where people are, obviously a bad government could misuse that. At Google, we're very, very focused on letting the end user make those decisions. And so the way we ultimately choose is we say, let the user have control over this kind of information. Do we collect it? Do we use it? The off button, and so forth and so on. Ultimately, because the technology is available, doesn't mean you should be forced to use it, nor should you be subjected to it if you don't want it. The fact of the matter is that technology is misused by evil people. Cell phones, for example, are used by criminals. The internet is used by criminals. Google, I'm sure, is as well. And that's a terrible thing. And to the degree that we can detect it and prevent it, we'll do our best. There are probably ways in which we can also automate, understand. I'm now speculating. We can also, for example, look at bad behavior and try to modify that using computers. We can probably detect a little bit of it. You could imagine your phone in that scenario detecting maybe this is a place you shouldn't be.
And telling somebody?
Well, you could presumably the bad person would just turn the phone off at that point.
What have you, and I'm sorry, this is another vague philosophical question, but all the information that passes through Google, everything you're able to see, people are uploading 24 hours of YouTube video every 2 minutes or something?
1 minute now.
1 minute now?
Yeah, it's frightening.
2 billion views a day or whatever it is.
Think about the amount of time being spent on YouTube.
Well, and that's where I'm going. In your job, what have you learned about human nature?
A lot. We all live in, well, first place, a couple of things. The first message about human nature is that human nature is overwhelmingly positive. And the second is that all of the people we don't know, who we either directly or indirectly think are not at our level, have all the same aspirations that we do. Just because they're poor or uneducated or in a different language or, oh my God, not Americans. Oh, it's amazing that they all want exactly the same thing, starting with Britney Spears. Right. It's truly amazing how global these markets are. And so to me, this message is largely a unifying one, that people are pretty much the same everywhere. And that means they also have some of the bad things as well. People want to be entertained. And I think we can decry, and especially people above a certain age, complain about what they view as the bowling alone phenomena, the changes in society. I would argue that those criticisms are ill-informed, misinformed, if you will. That in fact the people that I work with are highly interconnected and they're highly communicative and they're highly social, just in a way that's different from people in my generation. And that indeed they are much better prepared, if you will, to lead the world than we are, right? Because they're much more global, they're much more current, they're much quicker, they're much more current in the technology that's going to affect all of us.
Thank you very much, Eric Schmidt, for your time.
Thank you very much.